reading, they're all about the same size. So people aren't reading the driver's manual. And so I really rely on my dealer, and my dealer made me come back and get that training, which I think I appreciated it very much.
Hello. I was just wondering about all these delicate technologies you're putting into this the driving community and everything. So, if they're really delicate, as you say, is it going to be? Is there going to be an increase in going to the mechanic? And if so, I know as imported cars, you would have to go to a specialty mechanic to get things fixed and stuff like that. I was just wondering if there's going to be an increase in that also.
So a lot of the automated vehicles are going to end up being electrified from an environmental standpoint, but just also an operating efficiency standpoint. It costs much less per mile to operate an electrified vehicle. And with electric vehicles, you actually tend to see a dramatic reduction in service visits because you have a large reduction in moving parts. You also don't have fluids to change, things like that. So really now all we're talking about at this point would be the sensors themselves. And at this point, they are fairly robustly designed. They're going through automotive test procedures to make sure that they can handle the shock loads and also the extreme temperatures that you see in the average operating environment. So I would actually expect to see a pretty large reduction in service visits.
Hi, I'm a student researcher with the intersection of intelligent transportation systems and data privacy. So I had two questions. With the autonomous cars providing higher accuracy leading to almost negligible accidents, do we need insurance for our future vehicles? So will this lead to a shutdown of vehicle insurance company? That was my first question. And the second one to the Aaron from Navya. What are the different objects do the autonomous vehicles developed by Navya communicate with, like in its infrastructure? I mean, vehicle to infrastructure communication.
Sure. So I guess we can start with the Navya question. So from a vehicle to infrastructure standpoint, the main communication that we would have would be through to the traffic lights and the traffic management system, so that we can get SPAT messaging and things like that to not only know, without relying on the cameras, are the lights green, red, or yellow, but also from an efficiency standpoint, we can know the timing of that light change. So we're not accelerating up to an intersection where we're going to get a red light, or if we're slowing down and the light's going to be green by the time we get there, we can sort of manage our speed to make sure from an energy use standpoint, we're being as efficient as possible. There's definitely opportunities for additional interactions with infrastructure if we're able to either offload some of the processing and put infrastructure-based sensors rather than vehicle-based sensors. We can have those opportunities as well. But at this point, the main infrastructure would be with the traffic management system and with first responders.
And was the other question essentially more about the future of insurance? What does it look like? And obviously that's something industry is definitely focused on and discussing. And I think there's still time for the industry to figure out how this is going to evolve. But I think potentially there could be some sort of blend of what insurance looks like in the future to be partly commercial, partly personal. If you've got a self-driving vehicle that you personally own and you're able to send it out in the evenings when you're not driving it for someone else to use or share, then again, it might be some sort of blend of a commercial or personal line of insurance, or to the extent if we evolve to fewer personally owned vehicles and more fleet vehicles being available to a variety of, whole swaths of people, then maybe it switches more to strictly commercial insurance and you're insuring fleets of vehicles rather than personal vehicles. So I think it's hard to predict yet how that's going to evolve, but certainly those conversations are happening.
Okay. This question regards system safety. And does the industry require a system safety analysis on these systems before they put them on the road in public or in test, such that they can quantify the risk of a catastrophic event and also show that no single point failure can cause a catastrophic event?
So from a system standpoint, with regard to automated vehicles, there's actually very little in terms of required testing. Essentially, a vehicle can either meet federal motor vehicle safety standards, which isn't really going to address necessarily some of the automated, fully automated systems. It will address things like automatic emergency braking and things like that. But we're really in a position right now where NHTSA is looking for feedback from the industry to see what sort of testing methodology even makes sense. Because for things like testing automatic braking, for a vehicle like Navya's, where we don't have a brake pedal that can be actuated by some of their pieces of hardware in a standard system, we're really having to rewrite a lot of these testing and validation procedures for the fully automated vehicles.
And I would think in the systems that you see out there today too, a lot of these vehicles are being tested for that purpose. And, you know, they're well over 1 million miles tested on their technologies, such as Uber, Waymo, and others. And so there is a lot of testing going on. It's not I would say pre-testing, it's actually live testing, and then there's a lot of simulation that's happening too.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question then. Has this industry taken any cues from the aircraft industry in terms of systems engineering and system safety?
Yeah, we are definitely trying to follow an aerospace type standard where we have triple redundancy for all of the safety critical systems.
As we can expect it, an autonomous vehicle gives a lot of great hope to the people with low vision and also like blind or other type of disabilities. So my question is, are any kind of automakers or agent on board currently? And will like governments or industries or any other agent spend resources or give attention to this specific community?
Yeah, so I think when we're addressing the first and last mile underserved communities, those with you know, lack of sight, vision, mobility is definitely a key demographic because we want to be able to have equitable mobility for all. And when you have an automated vehicle, you can make special considerations. You can have audible messaging for those that are not able to sort of, you know, see the map of the bus where it's at, see their environment. And then we can take special considerations for people in wheelchairs. With the LiDARs, we actually know what the curb height is. So as we're pulling up to a bus stop, we can raise or lower our vehicle with the air suspension to make sure the angle of the ramp is minimized whenever possible. And then from a funding standpoint, there's actually quite a few programs out there, grants, that are specifically addressing mobility to doctor's appointments for the elderly, people like that. So in Detroit, we're actually going to be Navya deploying a pilot program where we're going to be taking some low-income neighborhoods and scheduling rides to and from the medical campus. So we're going to be doing that exact mission in Detroit later this year.
Yeah, that issue is a big part of the Smart City initiative, so to speak. Columbus, Ohio, Detroit, elsewhere are really emphasizing providing transportation services to underserved communities and even cash-based type populations within the community that may not have a credit card, be able to hire an Uber, for example. In the city of Columbus and under the Smart Columbus program, there's even an app now, a multimodal app, but it provides functionality also for prenatal care, especially, and then also for persons with cognitive disabilities. So they're really emphasizing these types of populations, but also services under the Smart City umbrella, so to speak. And it's pretty pervasive in many cities across the country now. It's really happening, and it's a good thing.
Aaron, so I think your cutoff was 30 centimeters high obstacle. So what's to stop a rioter / terrorist dropping off a long 2x4 in an intersection and causing total gridlock? And what do you know about 5G causing cancer?
So with regard to sort of, you know, different ways that people can take advantage of an autonomous vehicle, whether it's throwing out a two-board in front, whether it's knowing that you can cross the street in front of it and it's not going to hit you. So, you know, there are different ways that you can take advantage of an automated vehicle. And I'm not sure there's a great way to get around the problem of throwing out a 2x4, because that's something that if it was a vehicle piloted by a human, they would have the exact same vulnerability to that same type of situation. But I guess the best way for me to answer that question broadly is to say the only way to get these vehicles more capable is by driving more miles and getting more data collected. So eventually there will be ways to get around these problems. We just need to be diligent and keep getting miles generating data, I'd say. And with regard to 5G, I have no expertise on the effects of that, to be honest with you.
I'll address it in a different way too. I mean, the vulnerabilities today, actually, for things like our traffic signal control systems and our networks, public networks, that really is a concern for me and for a lot of public agencies. And I'm going to share a secret with you. Maybe it's not such a secret, but you know, as you travel down the road, you see a lot of roadside cabinets, you know, aluminum cabinets that accommodate all kinds of expensive traffic signal control and networking equipment in those cabinets. And all it takes is what's called a number 2 key to get into one of those cabinets. And that number 2 key, you can buy one on eBay. And if you ask people in city government, how many of you have a number 2 key? About 15 people, yeah, there's one up there, in fact. So they can access virtually any traffic control cabinet in the country with that key. What's to keep them from just going in with a memory stick, and if they had malicious intent, they could go in there and plug it in and basically create havoc with the local networks and with the traffic signal control systems. So don't tell anybody this. This is being recorded, isn't it? Oh, that's right. Yeah, okay, yeah, edit this part out. But that's a physical security issue currently that exists, and you can get rid of that with like cyber locks and such. And as far as 5G goes, we already have 4G LTE and all kinds of cellular, and yeah, it's going to be ubiquitous with the small cells that are out there on the roadway and such. But it's already, cellular capabilities are already pretty ubiquitous, and we're seeing a lot of communications out there. I don't know what the impacts will be when that is magnified, but it doesn't seem to have had an impact yet. The bigger concern I have is that 5G, if it's used as communication and connectivity services for vehicle to infrastructure or vehicle to business and vehicle to government, because the communication carriers are looking at vehicles as the next frontier for their services. That now isn't that the place where government should be acting rather than business to ensure safety, for example, at intersections. The last thing you want, and hopefully this doesn't happen, is that a vehicle is streaming video into their car and they come into an intersection and they don't get a critical safety message, and they get into a crash. So we need to ensure that safety remains paramount in a 5G environment, and that's really key, I think, and the risk is much higher for that kind of thing, and the benefits are much higher than the possibility of health risks in that kind of environment.
I think we have our last 4 questions lined up, and we're probably going to run out of time at that point. So.
Hi, this is about insurance, right, for the self-driving car, right? Somebody touched on it, but I think in the self-driving scenario, let's say I'm not in the car, I send the car from my house to some place and something happens on the way, some accident, let's say. So the scenario is much more complicated because I'm not the driver, right? So the problem could have been one of the signals, or it could be something on the road, it could be something in the car. So I think the insurance in that case involves multi-agencies as opposed to just being two drivers, which is the current scenario. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely the potential for it to get more complicated. And I've heard other experts on insurance saying that a lot of this is going to have to get litigated before we really get any conclusion as to was it the owner of the automated vehicle, even if they weren't in the car? Was it the developer of the software? Was it some other element or some other stakeholder that has an interest in that vehicle that is the responsible or liable party in that instance? And I don't think we can really understand how that's going to play out until we start to see some of that happening.
Aaron, I've got a question. Can you talk about the charging requirements and process for your electric vehicles? And then I'd open it up to anybody if they have any vision of what a national, charging stations might look like as we transition away from combustible engines to electric vehicles.
Sure. So Navya has really designed our vehicle to be as adaptable and agnostic as possible. So from a charging perspective, we generally can just plug right into a 200-volt wall outlet. We don't need any special J1772, CHAdeMO, no Tesla charger. We don't require any of that. So from the operator's perspective, they like that there's really minimal needs to add additional infrastructure. Now, if there's J1772 or any of those other standard chargers, we can retrofit our vehicle to become compliant. But really, at the end of the day, we don't need level 4. We don't need any high voltage stuff. We can just go 208, 220, 240 and charge away in about 4 to 8 hours, depending on how much amperage we have available at that circuit. But I think what's going to become more and more important as we're needing these vehicles to really be out on the road, 12, 18, maybe even 24 hours a day if possible, is things like wireless charging at bus stops, different ways that we can look for opportunities to charge, whether that's in the road, overhead. There's a lot of different ways that we can manage that today. But I see the in-road charging as really the future of commercial EVs operating, really long cycles throughout the day.
And that's kind of a two-part question, actually, because, there'll be close to 100 new models of electric vehicles on the road by 2023. And our infrastructure is ill-equipped to accommodate all of those electric vehicles that are about to come on market. That means not just charging stations, but the grid, modernization of the grid. We had an engineer that did some consulting for Con Edison in New York City, and they kept blowing transformers for some reason. They asked him to come out. Well, what happened was one person in this affluent neighborhood bought a Tesla, and all of his neighbors had to have one too. And they're all charging at night, and the transformers are blowing right and left. And it just doesn't work with the type of infrastructure that we have out there right now. And I am also a big proponent of wireless induction, because in an automated vehicle world, when you think about how dynamic it's going to be, how are you going to plug in a vehicle? A driverless vehicle that may not have anybody in it, or do you have people like at gas stations now that have to come out and plug your vehicle into an electrical outlet to charge it, for example, get a fast charge? So wireless induction, I think, is going to be really important in the future too, as part of this whole electrification of vehicles.
And one other thing I would add, just thinking about AAA's business model and the services that we provide to our members. Several years ago, we pilot tested in a few regions of the country a quick charge service vehicle. So if you have if you're a AAA member and have an electric vehicle and ran out of juice on the side of the road, we could have a quick charge vehicle come and provide the equivalent of a couple of gallons of gas to get you to the nearest charging station or get home. So that's something certainly that we are thinking about as well, to how we can provide some value in that environment.
Yeah, thanks for your time. My question ties in with the last one, I think. Talking about the future of transportation funding, and it's sort of been asked in different ways with the paradigm shift question also. Obviously, infrastructure is changing. You know, we're not going to have a tomorrow that doesn't include asphalt or concrete necessarily, but, you know, putting in new technology infrastructure is going to cost money while keeping older cars on the road. And also revenues are changing for states and the federal government as cars move away from gas tax. So can you guys talk about and maybe speculate a little bit on what transportation funding will look like in the future?
Why are y'all looking at me? That's a tough question, and it is being talked about today and how we're going to deal with it. One of the many ideas that have been bounced around is vehicle miles traveled. How do you deal with that? There's Missouri's got, well, Iowa actually just passed a bill last year that charges a fee based on the type of electric vehicle you're using, and that's happening. But we don't have the solution for mobility as a service. We don't have the solution for a total electric yet in Kansas, and so there's a lot of discussion, a lot of talk going on, but we don't have the answer. And we're hoping to get one, but everybody kind of ends up landing on the road user charge or the vehicle miles traveled is where we all kind of tend to land today. And, you know, there is the talk and of tolling. Tolling may be a way to subsidize it, but there's just no silver bullet for today.
Next month, you'll see an Axios article by me that addresses this very topic. But you know, it's got to be a mix of things. It can't be just one thing that's going to support our transportation infrastructure going forward. And so, you know, there's a lot of discussion now about interstate tolling, for example, tolling of the interstate highway systems, managed lane type of services, those types of things. You know, so it's going to be a mix of alternatives. I mean, New York City is going toward congestion pricing, for example, and then those revenues will be diverted into the subway system. So you're given an opportunity for some intermodal trade-offs also through some of these funding mechanisms. So yeah, there's no one definitive answer, but I think we will have to migrate toward a VMT or a mileage-based user fee type scenario. And unfortunately, the new authorization bill by the U.S. Congress does not include any consideration at all for that that I could find, and that's a 5-year bill. So that concerns me greatly.
Well, for me, this is not a question, is overall what is technology is doing, a lot of things. Like when I go to France, there is a lot of roundabouts, and that help flow of the car nicely. But if you are first time, you'll be afraid of to go into station. That was I feel that time. Now I see also Wichita has a roundabout also near to the downtown. So that way we have to evaluate like which one is efficient for these upcoming situations. Second thing is technology that depends on the mother nature also. Like interruption by yesterday night, I saw 3 times my internet was down. I have to go and initialize my modem and to bring it up. So what happened in the car, suddenly something happened,
and then the accident happens very quickly before interaction coming. So flow of information or data has to be very quick, because otherwise accident will be everywhere. And so 5G is the key here to invite 5G to accommodate those technologies. And next thing is standardization. All the companies are doing different things. Ultimately, the goal has to be pointed, and standardization meeting has to, or conference has to standardize all the parts. So that way we are in the right direction. Otherwise, every companies are doing different direction. Ultimately, doesn't solve the problem quickly, and we are spending a lot of money in the wrong direction maybe. So some of the things, and also about the I don't know how far some of the countries like China is far ahead with a 5G, and why US cannot do that quickly to get the 5Gs coming. I heard yesterday there's a guy called, his name is Jeff Brown. He's a technology tech stock market guru. He was telling all the cell phone will be obsolete by next 2 years. You have to throw them out because 5G will transform everybody's cell phone. And so 5G is the key for these to welcome those technologies. And so all the state, government-wise, has to be quickly implement that so that other technology take advantage the system. And so that people doesn't have to go through still 4G and buying the wrong product and wasting money. So that's, I feel that's the way evolution has to take place. And the standardization conference, like the aerospace industry, they have a lot of standardization all over the world. We were making aeroplanes, they have a standard product name and the system working and process working. Similarly, transportation industry in local wise, they have to do some kind of standardization, all the parts and all the things, so that they are in the right direction, everything. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make a couple of comments. One is the Federal Communications Commission has published their FAST plan to get 5G implemented much more quickly than, and they do so by expediting the permit process. One thing about the US versus China, for example, is governmental fragmentation. I mean, you have everybody from small villages and rural townships all the way up to major cities and states, all with different levels of control over road rights of way and such to deploy small cell technology to implement 5G type solutions on our roadways. So the FAST plan is intended to expedite the permit process and to minimize barriers for the carriers to implement small cell technology. And again, the issue with that, in my opinion, is that it takes authority away from government agencies like KDOT and the city of Wichita, for example, to dictate how much they should charge for their permits, how they should go about it. A carrier can come in and say, I want to deploy 1,000 small cells out here, and the current plan says they have to issue permits for 1,000 locations within 90 days, I think it is, something along those lines. So we've got to be realistic about those types of things too, and we've got to make sure that we're respecting the authority of each level of government when we deploy these things. And again, I'll go back to my previous comment about a 5G environment and how that now moves a lot of government responsibility over to the private sector, and is that the right place for it? When they can go out and put their equipment on any pole that's owned by a utility or a public agency for minimal cost, and the government agency has to go out there and give a permit and inspect it and make, they've at least got to cover their costs, if not more. I would prefer a bartering environment where, if you put a small cell out there, I get some fiber capacity back. You know, let's work through some agreements and have some compromises available to government agencies so they're not the big losers in this.
I think that covers it for us. We're going to wrap it up now. We can't thank you enough for coming to this event today. Now, remember, there are others coming up, so please share with your family, friends, coworkers, spread the word. So the next one's October 11th. Registration is open for that one right now. January 31st is the second one after that, and then April 17th. Those two are in 2020. So for information and registration, just go to www.wichita.edu/autonomous vehicles. And we want to thank our presenters one more time. Give them a big hand. Yes. Jill Ingrassia of AAA, Jim Barbaresso, and also Aaron Foster with Navya, and Mike Floberg with KDOT. Thanks, guys. It's great. Have a great day.
Good job.
Well done.